Categorical slicers and options in Power BI. I want to walk through an overview of the features and functionality for the category slicer field types that you can put into a slicer on the page in Power BI. Because there are many different ways, as you can see in front of us, to configure not only the look but the design of them, plus some important functionality consideration for how the user would want to interact with it and the types of filtering scenario they might have. So, I want to discuss all the features and details so we get the all of possible and understand truly how to implement this and all the considerations to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and I hop into Power BI, get started. I am going to use a product hierarchy slicer that we have here in the per left, where we will have the product category, subcategory, and product name at each of these lower parent and child label. Now one of the first consideration that I want to mention when we are using a slicer are like this, that has a lot of different field inside of it, as it's a very useful to include the search bar, so when we can search for things such as home, it will show us a filter list related to all the items below it. Now, depending on what you might want to search, you can choose one or multiple at a time. I have also had a few people request whether or not there is a way to do select all options similar to filter list. In Excel, when you search for a filter to fill on, unfortunately, that's not available today in Power BI, but it is something that is on the Ideas website, so hopefully someday we do get the particular features now that the search field here can be turned on coming up to the Eclipse and enabling it from this menu here, and that will then add this search box into the menu. So that is one thing to consider when you have a lot of fields using either a vertical or a drop-down slicer, is to turn on the search bar. Now, in additional to that, I want us to consider the field scenario for multiple selection. The default behavior for a seal in Power BI is used as you click in Select Want. Select one value at a time. However, if you want to multi-select, you can hold Control key and then be able to select multiple items at the same time. If this is a common filtering scenario, I would recommend it that we actually come over to the menu here under Visualization. You can see an option for multi-select with a control turn that have come back to the menu here. Now we can see that without having to hold the Control key we can make multiple selections at the same time. Now, another filter scenario to consider is whether or not there should only ever be one selection made at a time, and should there always be your filter selection and force when you published this report. So that's it. Single select option, turning that on, you can see the slicer over here has now defaulted square have turned to circular radio button, and now only one selection can ever be made at a time, plus the menu closes when you make a selection because only a single selection can ever be made. Now, the one downside to this is one of these has to be published as a default election to be made as the filter, because there is no way now to actually clear your selection coming up to the upper right, so that one convex to have with this option, but it will ensure that at any level only one selection can never be made at a particular time, with the single selection option coming back to the format and design, turning single select off and show select all. Let's go ahead and turn this one on, coming back to this now. What we have as an option in here is the ability to do a select all and a show select all button. With this enable, essentially allows you to do and everything except. So now I can select most of my items, but maybe I just do not want to see value, but I want to see the filters for everything else, so it lets me the select a value rather than focusing on the values. Let's also come to the slicer, our configuration page, where I have view other slicer, our configuration applied into here. We have already explored the drop down in the vertical list. There are some options that were added within the last year, where you come back to the format pan, open up the hierarchy section. We have the ability now to actually control the steps layout indentation. So let me show you this. I am going to change this from 15 to 25, and what we will observe is that this get indentation at a further pixel distant, so you can choose how much of it indentation it has, and you can give it less or more within the range. Additionally, the expand and collapse has the ability to be configured between the standard chevron, plus or minus, and caret depending on your design. And the last two types of filter display that we can do is the two that we see over here. So this lies Our right gear versus the one that we have the top simply we show horizontal scroll between the difference between this to if I was to grab this and this size it notice that I am not getting the tiles however now this one down here notice that it automatically start to add row. As I give it space, the biggest difference between this to once again coming to the Format General Properties Advanced option it's whether or not I have a responsive turn off so for the visual displays our setting type is tile of tile and as long as I have responsive turn off so for the visual this slicer setting type is tile of tile and as long as I have responsive on it automatically will take them and turn it into more of a grate depending on whatever size that I give it now if I turn that then it will just give me that a single or regardless of how tall or wide I make it but overall this cover a nice board sweeping discussion around each of the various features implementation and filter consideration that we might have for user related